Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's OAAA lunch break. I'm Stephen Freitas with OAAA, and today's topic is perspectives stepping away from the new normal for DTC and out of home. And we have a terrific panel joining us today. DTC brands are significant disruptors in the marketplace. And one of the recent successes is Away, a modern lifestyle brand creating thoughtful products designed for transformative travel. And we're going to hear from Away Director of Acquisitions and Marketing, Neil Heckman, who's going to explain how and why the travel brand uses out-of-home to reach active consumers. And Neil is in conversation with Quan Media Group CEO, Brian Rappaport, who is our moderator for the day. And they are joined in conversation with insights and thoughts from OUTFRONT Media Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships, Paul Lenhart. Before we begin today, I want to cover just a few housekeeping topics. First, we will welcome your questions throughout the webinar. So feel free to submit them via the question box on your screen at any time during this webinar. And should you have any technical difficulties, use the chat function and a member of the OAAA staff will assist you. And finally, after the webinar is completed today, you'll receive a link to a post-webinar survey, which we will use to tailor our future content. And last, we will make this webinar available with a recording following today's program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. This is awesome. It's always one thing when you chat with, colleagues and coworkers and clients, but when you have friends as well, it's kind of even better. So I feel like this is going to be a really fun, engaging conversation, as I've known both Paul and Neil for a while now. Before we get into all the nitty gritty around D2C, out of home, and all of the good stuff, which I'm sure everybody is here to listen to, we could do some light introductions, a quick little background about each of us, and where we are today. So Paul, I'll start with you.
Hi, Brian.
Hello.
Sure. So I started in media on the agency side, Mindshare over to and then I found myself at Zenith, where I transitioned to the outdoor team. So at that point, it was the digital outdoor team. So it was kind of interpreting the new role of what digital will play within an organization, which was exciting. And I mean, absolutely fell in love with outdoor. And about 3 years ago, made the transition over to OUTFRONT Media to the national sales team. And it's been an incredible journey there, and very thankful for that experience, and happy to talk about it today.
Awesome. And Neil?
Yeah, I'm Neil Heckman. I oversee acquisition marketing at Away, the direct-to-consumer luggage brand. I've been with Away for about a year, overseeing all performance marketing channels from Facebook and search to TV, direct mail, shared mail, the whole gamut of marketing spend. Prior to being with Away, I was at the direct-to-consumer mattress company Casper for about a year and a half, and then I started my career in the agency world, working on performance marketing campaigns for big Fortune 500 companies like Verizon and Nationwide, and then very, very small brands at a smaller startup ad agency shop, like Save the Children, and companies that had much smaller budgets than the Verizons and the Nationwides of the world.
Awesome. And I'm Brian Rappaport. I'm the founder of Quan Media Group. We are an out-of-home boutique agency. Prior to Quan, I spent 7 years at Zenith Media with Paul as my boss for a large chunk of them, and then moved over to Rapport under IPG, where I worked as a group director for 4+ years on the relationships, managing the relationships with IPG sister agencies, including Media Hub, Trillia, Huge, and Initiative. Founded Quan because I have a deep found passion for working in the D2C category, have had experience helping scale the out-of-home efforts for brands including Casper, Away, Dagny Dover, Daily Harvest, and a bunch of others. And it's just an exciting time. I think that the category is kind of just incredible, and it is kind of taken on a life of its own. So excited to chat about that today. It's obviously been a really interesting past few months for all of us. And I think that kind of the question that everyone has had for their friends and colleagues is, what have the past few months been like for you, both professionally and personally? So Neil, I mean, obviously these are weird times. I'm going to try and not use the cliche phrase new normal too much today, but the past few months, how's it been for you, both professionally and personally, dealing with this whole, pandemic?
Yeah, so right at the beginning of March, I'm based in New York City, so I kind of was starting to get wind that things were going to get really, really bad. So I quarantined outside of Philadelphia at my parents' place for about 2 months. It coincided very nicely with, things taking a big turn professionally as well for I think most people in every industry, whether you were seeing a downturn or an upturn in your business. Travel was obviously hugely affected and remains hugely affected. So we'll go into a lot of this a little bit later, I'm sure, but the past couple of months professionally have really been sort of a start over in a lot of places at Away, figuring out how are we going to talk about travel in the next couple of months? Is it right to be talking about travel in the next couple of months? And really thinking about how we can broaden our reach and how we can talk to new individuals as we're all kind of dealing with this reckoning of it's very easy to not talk to everybody who we want to be a specific customer of all of our brands. So there's been a lot of deep sort of soul searching conversations that have taken place at every level of my world professionally. And then personally, I've heard a lot of people saying, we're not working during a quarantine and a pandemic. There's a pandemic happening and we're trying to work. And that's definitely something that I've tried to instill with my teams and sort of saying like, nobody's really functioning at their best right now. Let's pick up the slack for everybody. Let's all sort of like lend a hand where it's needed. And, we will get through this, as cliche and corny as that sounds.
I couldn't agree more. Paul, for you professionally, personally, I mean, you've been hunkered down with young children. What has it been like for you?
I mean, professionally, my professional life's been like annoying. It's been, professionally, it's been, it's been great. I think Neil said it best with the start over idea. I think philosophically, the idea that you're kind of looking at a business that, I mean, it doesn't exist the way it does for anybody anymore, whether you're on a brand side, supply side, buy side, it doesn't matter. You're really taking a look at what skill set do I have? What do I enjoy doing? And then how are we going to help piece everything back together? Because, I don't think I've ever felt more, fulfilled professionally or motivated to kind of get involved in what things are going to look like. And fortunate enough to have a manager that supports that philosophy, and just working through all of that over the past couple of months has been, professionally, I think one of the more fulfilling experiences I've had so far. I mean, personally, I think, you go through pretty marked stages, right? At first, it was like a crippling fear over, being around other people and will I run out of alcohol? And then it went to like a DIY phase where, I went around the house kind of repairing everything. It was like me and you two fixing the world. And then, spent July kind of gaining back the weight that I lost in June from all the work that I did. And now I'm, rotating between, feeling comfortable working at home, kind of balancing that work-life thing to, threatening to burn my house down if I hear another theme song to the show Bluey, which is very popular for people with kids right now.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, for me, it was mostly how to pivot and kind of how to change expectations. And while it was such a scary thing back in, March, once we kind of understood that this was going to be a new way of life for the foreseeable future, it was okay. How can you kind of change your own, career expectations and kind of use this almost as motivation to not stop working and wait, but kind of help, educate clients, at least obviously speaking through the lens of out of home, that the out of home landscape is so vast and that it's still such a viable media channel, even in light of stay-at-homes or, of cities reopening in phases. And for me, it was, an opportunity to kind of educate clients and re-educate clients that, yes, we understand marketing dollars are being re-examined and marketing in general is probably being re-examined. But if you still do want to speak to your consumers, there's obviously a really smart, strategic, conductive way to do that through the, out-of-home channel. So, before we really do jump into things, I mean, what do you, this whole new normal, what's the strangest thing that you've kind of encountered over the past few months to kind of loosen up the mood?
Are you
Paul?
serious about that?
Yeah, I'm serious. Like, what's the most interesting thing? Or what's the craziest thing, I guess, that's happened to you?
I started talking to an owl in April. I hooked up a Wi-Fi speaker in my backyard and it landed, and we've established a relationship. the
Yeah.
owl and I. So I think my connection with nature is probably the strangest thing that I've seen so far develop in me.
Awesome, awesome. And Neil, I mean, I think, you obviously have relocated for a few months. So not to steal the thunder, but for you,
Yeah.
this newest thing during quarantine?
Since I've been back in the city, I've taken 2 weekend camping trips outside of the city. And I think if you talk to most people who knew me pre-quarantine, camping would not be one of the top things that I'd be looking to get into. But suddenly it's a thing that I've actually looked forward to and enjoyed. So I think many people would find that relatively surprising.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I got married on a rooftop when I was supposed to get married 2 other separate days. And I've lost 3 sets of friends, including a younger sibling to the suburbs, all strictly because of COVID. So it's been a weird few months on top of quarantining with my in-laws for 11 weeks in Florida. So
What was the strangest thing at the in-laws house in Florida?
I'm really getting into intense games of pool horse with my father-in-law. That's probably it. But yeah, definitely a wild time. So D2C and out of home, jumping right into it. I mean, there's obviously been a love affair, and there's been so many brands that have used the channel, and I think even more so now as a priority channel than as a secondary, to really kind of convey brand awareness. So Neil, allowing you to kind of start the conversation, why do you think out of home and the world of D2C really do work well together? Obviously a broad question, but curious, having worked at 2 of the more prominent, D2C brands out there.
Yeah, I think people are intrinsically interested in things that are out in the world and are available for everyone to see. My 2 D2C brand experiences have really, I would say, kind of grown up on the New York City subway. I think if you talk to most people in New York City, and even when I was still with Casper, and I would say I work at Casper, and they say, "Oh, the subway ads, that's where you work," and I'm like, "Yeah, kind of." So I think there's this inherent sort of interest in out of home that creative direct to consumer brands really have an outlet to explain who they are. And when you're talking about direct to consumer brands, in my mind, they are typically the younger, the more nimble, the more agile, the more willing to take risks, because the bet for them is often a little bit bigger than a more established brand. A brand that's trying to go from 0 to $1 million in revenue has a lot more to gain than somebody trying to go from $1 to $2 million in revenue. So I think that the idea of risking it all, if you will, it has always been something that direct to consumer brands have been very inspired by. And I think the idea of using out of home to follow that mindset is a lot of what the brands have been doing. Out of home is a blank canvas. It's not a 1x1 on Facebook. It's not a 30-second TV spot. You can kind of do what you want with this space. There's really no restrictions, and you can get even more creative than just a regular billboard or something like that. So I think the creativity that sort of exists between out of home and the inherent desire of a direct-to-consumer brand to prove themselves have always been that perfect marriage, if you will.
Yeah, totally. I mean, definitely you look at awareness, and obviously the fact that out of home is an incredible awareness driver, the ability to deliver mass reach, that one-to-one connection. Paul, I mean, what have you seen, in terms of talking about the love affair between D2C brands and out of home? Why does it work so well?
I mean, I think, it's similar in the DNA in that I think, Neil, to your point, there's a creativity there. I think D2C brands that sprint from 0 to $1 million is truly important because there's a deep understanding of what that brand plays within their competitive set, who they're trying to talk to, what they're trying to say. And I think with that understanding, you say risking it all. I think it's a measured risk in that there's a lot of work that goes into, developing that brand and going directly to a consumer. So what you're going to say, how you want to say it. And I think, outdoor, of course, it's a great brand builder, one of the best in doing that. But the way that D2C brands approach it is a bit different than some of the legacy brands, I think, in that, legacy brands, there's a lot of is a lot of econometric modeling. There's a lot of looking at how do I optimize by channel. So that legacy work, which out of home has a really hard time fitting into because it really wasn't designed for it, kind of inhibits the ability to use the medium, I think, to its fullest potential. So, when you have a D2C brand that knows its consumer, knows exactly who it is and what it wants to say, I think, the creativity really comes through in outdoor. And not only that, but I think when you do that well, you use out of home well, you have the creative right, you have the messaging right, you have all this data that helps shape what it's going to look like. It's basically like the city of New York saying, hey, everybody, check out this new brand. It's like your buddy. It's like a word of mouth. Like, check this out. It's really cool. It's a young kind of new hip brand, and New York is right there behind it.
Totally.
Whatever market, I'm sorry.
Totally. I think measurement, is always going to be one of the most interesting topics, of conversation with D2C brands who are looking to explore the out-of-home channel. And part of why I think out-of-home has seen such success over the past few years is because of the evolution of measurement. Neil, I'm curious for your take on how measurement kind of plays a role in out-of-home. Is it, I don't want to say is it a big deal for you in a way, but how do you kind of look at it when looking through the lens of out-of-home for the brands that you work at?
Yeah. So, measurement is something that all brands, especially during a downturn, during a pandemic, probably are spending a lot more time thinking about, because anytime you're deploying money, you want to try to make that money back. Especially in the travel space right now, I imagine in every space, there's impacted areas where, there's sort of this reckoning of like, I can't measure this directly. Is this a place where I want to be putting money toward? And, that is definitely a fallacy, I would say, in the offline world. There's a lot that can be done from measurements, whether you're thinking about driving to retail traffic, whether you're thinking about lookalike or match market testing. There are a lot of different ways that you can do measurement within the out-of-home space. I think this fallacy that I was sort of alluding to is that, brands have existed for decades before there were clicks and pixels and all that good stuff that is the backbone of a lot of direct-to-consumer brands and isn't going anywhere. But all of that to sort of say, when you think about the conversion cycle of a typical consumer, the awareness piece has to start somewhere. The awareness piece doesn't have to just be in TV, even though TV is a great driver of awareness. You can use out of home really across all areas of the funnel, upper to get that awareness, mid to reinforce it, and lower to drive that conversion through many different outlets and many different tools to really be able to get an understanding of when you're looking at out of home bus shelters or digital billboard takeovers in a specific neighborhood. You can see what that impact is when you have the measurement tools set up right, but it's never going to be as easy as logging. Let me rephrase. It's never going to be the exact same as going onto Facebook and looking at your cost per order or something like that. It's a little bit of a mind change, but I think that that's the part that makes it fun for a growth marketer like me. It is reliant on me, my teams, my out-of-home partners like Quan to be able to help us put together these measurement techniques so that we do feel confident in the spend that we're deploying.
Awesome. Paul, it's unique for you because you've been on both sides. You've now been on the buying side and the selling side. I mean, you've seen out-of-home measurement kind of come a long way. What do you think is, I would say the biggest plus in terms of the opportunities that measurement offers now for D2C brands? I guess, what's your point of view on the best way for a D2C brand to utilize, out-of-home measurement in a more effective way, I would say?
Yeah, I think when I started on the strategy side, you could see some of the limitations inherent in outdoor. I think, when you're trying to measure the effectiveness of outdoor as a medium, it doesn't fit neatly into any of the traditional models for measuring. So you're basically relying on either someone that's a fan of outdoor or something else outside of how you measure your other media. And I say that because I think that the industry as a whole has come a real long way. I think last year we saw tremendous growth in the category. I think the idea of looking at location exposure, all of the digital characteristics that have been used now being applied to outdoor has started to fuel some of that growth. So, Media, it's art and science, right? It's understanding your brand and how you're going to communicate to them, and then being able to activate on that. So I think, for a D2C brand to drive that awareness, but know that that is a piece of the overall puzzle that'll ultimately lead to the clicks and to the sales that you need. Especially for a growing brand, is important. I think that's what the industry as a whole has gotten to a point, going from just a gross impression count to GRPs, and now to some more real-time look at location and exposure and actions after that is exciting. It's a cool time to be involved. But Brian, I would ask you, going from starting your own agency focused specifically on D2C, how have you looked at measurement and what do you think some of the value for focusing on the D2C brand, what do you think you bring to that in terms of how measurement relates?
Yeah, I think it's kind of awesome because there's now so many different partners in the measurement space in regards to out of home that you can kind of test and explore and see kind of what works best, whether you're looking for a client that wants to measure, out of home placements and its effect on drive to site or drive to store, or you want to capture exposed and unexposed mobile IDs and then retarget on Facebook or Google. There's so many different KPIs that D2C brands have. And it seems like every other week there's a new measurement partner that's able to fulfill a way to kind of, track those KPIs and see that they work. That we've been fortunate enough to play around with everyone. We run tests with Mira, we run tests with Blue Byte. We're working with a new measurement partner right now, Quorum, that is able to do that exposed, unexposed mobile ID, and then retarget elsewhere. And I think for us, it's whether it's a pre and post awareness study or again, putting a proprietary pixel on a landing page to measure, drive to site as a result of seeing an out of home placement. It's about sitting down with a brand and understanding what they're looking to accomplish other than strict awareness and helping them, to show that obviously out of home is effective and that it works. And we're going to kind of continue playing around in that space. We've, I think, already worked with 5 different measurement partners. So, while I do love those generic brand awareness campaigns based on us understanding a city and a market and where a brand should be based on their audience, that's not always going to be what a brand is looking for. So we kind of have to have a little bit more in our back pocket. Kind of jumping back into OOH specifically, Neil, they've done so much in the out-of-home space, and it's been incredible. Whether, we'll talk about the campaign with Serena Williams, and they've done an incredible partnership or had an incredible partnership with Dwayne Wade in the past. Do you want to give us a little bit of kind of a historical background of OOH and how they've utilized or looked at the out-of-home channel? Because it definitely has led to some really strong success that you guys have seen as a brand.
Yeah, so we've definitely focused on transit. Depending on the time of the year, we've done New York City subway, we've done the Chicago commuter, the Chicago L, I almost forgot what that was called. We've done traditional billboards in markets of interest. And now we're also thinking about, as we have new products that are coming out in the near future, how do we introduce these products to specific audiences that we haven't necessarily targeted before? We have a new product coming out toward the end of August, which we partnered with Brian on to launch an out-of-home campaign in a couple of key demographics, a couple of key cities for us around locations of interest. That's all I can say right now, but there will be a very cool sort of out of the ordinary out-of-home campaign that my creative team got super excited about as soon as we started to talk about this product launch. So I think that out of home for us has been on brand awareness as a key metric, as driving revenue as a key metric during key times of us from a seasonality stance, or from in key demographic city-based areas where we think there's a lot of potential to push additional traffic. And now as we're looking to finally get back into our new product launches and new categories to enter, out of home will definitely be a big space that we'll be playing into as we look to introduce these new products to the widest swaths of people in the most meaningful way.
A lot of good teasers in that.
Yeah, I dislike being so cryptic, but
I like it though.
I cannot give any more information.
Excitement. Paul, one of the questions that came in, and I think you could have a good hand in answering this, is how are D2C brands pivoting into other markets rather than just New York or LA? What are they doing instead of subway? So not necessarily answering that, but from your point of view, again, you've worked on so many different brands, big, small, medium, and obviously OUTFRONT has such great relationships with so many key D2C brands. What would you say are some other effective ways outside of, the subway and outside of just New York and LA, for D2C brands to kind of make themselves present? Like, what, in your opinion, would be kind of an effective strategy if you're a brand that said, okay, we've conquered New York, maybe we'll look at LA later, we want to go to a secondary market, but how can we make ourselves feel present there?
Funny you should ask. 100% commitment to OUTFRONT will solve every one of your problems, without question. I think, over time, as I mentioned, going from impressions to GRPs to now location data is interesting. So we're kind of building this huge new like car that has all these cool features. You can do so much really, interesting stuff now in kind of helping to support and build a strategy around. So, our data management platform, Smart Scout, does a really good job of looking at, exposure on the individual unit level through a view shed. So we can, look at who we, look in an audience. It's backed and built up from audience segmentation data to a point where you can, to Neil's point, identify these new audiences and then look over time at the change. And I think that, that's been a huge, resource for us as we navigate, the pandemic in a way of, how markets are responding. So, I think starting with an audience, understanding where they are, where they move on a near real-time basis has helped shape these conversations to say, perhaps, the MTA and the commuter rail for the time being isn't the best spot, but I know these people are out and they're being it's more local and it's more regionalized. So now we can have a conversation about how do I localize my message? And, people are staying closer to home and, we see peaks in traffic on Friday. So what does that mean? Are people going out to get things for the weekend? So from this location data, you can start to build all of these points that help you get to a change and an evolution in how you approach outdoor. That's really exciting. I think that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of out of home is that you can get super targeted to match your lookalike audiences, to match the regions, the cities where you have had successes, or you can just kind of take a shot in the dark. You can say, hey, this city is of interest to me. It's just a feeling that I have that I think we could actually see some increased revenue here. It looks like some of our other markets where we've seen success, we just haven't given it really the opportunity. There's no reason to directly answer the question that we can't have a little bit more of a localized approach in those markets through out of home to test the waters. I think even if it's a month over month change in site traffic from a specific city, like to me, that is a measurement piece that I'm very interested in. And that as we are looking to bring in new audiences, as we are looking to speak to new people in different ways, it's very, very top of mind. And just to quickly add on to that, I think that as direct-to-consumer brands are sort of all coming to this reckoning of, are we going to remain an e-commerce brand or are we going to have brick and mortar stores? Are we going to have stores in malls? Are they going to be freestanding stores? The idea of out of home partnered with some other localized marketing efforts is really a very, very effective retail driver. And I've seen that at both brands that I've worked at, Casper and Away. So, I do think there's an inherent risk in all direct-to-consumer brands and, probably all brands to think this is the group of people, this is the city that I've had success with. I'm going to keep going here. But we know eventually those pools of people they're going to dry up. Everybody only needs so many suitcases. Everybody only needs so many mattresses within specific cities. We need to branch out, find people who haven't been exposed to our brands before and talk to them in a way that's most effective for them and most able to get the brand value and brand purpose across.
I think that's a really good point in that, the art and science again behind marketing. Data is a piece of the puzzle, but I think that the art behind it is something that D2C brands do really, really well. And I think that as us on the supply side, we're introducing a whole new host of data to the equation. And I think that it's actually what I've seen more recently. It's changing the types of questions that we need to ask and the types of conversations that we have. I think historically, on an outdoor RFP, it would be very specific to either a location or something that's been hammered out on, before without any type of discussion. Now, I think, Neil can come to Brian and say, hey, I'm looking to see what this audience is doing. It might be information that he only, spoke to his digital partners about in the past, but now it's like, what can you do for me in outdoor? You say people are more localized. So do I run buses instead of subway? Like that conversation that you reserved only for your social or your digital partners is now trickling down to outdoor. And I think us, on the sell side need to do a better job, I think, of pushing and getting those answers, because we have we have a lot of really cool data that we can help kind of shape an overall campaign with.
That's a phenomenal segue, because we're going to get into like the new normal and kind of how commuter patterns have changed. One question that just kind of came in, and Neil, I'm curious for your take on this. How would you define a D2C brand when essentially all brands now have some sort of relationship directly with the consumer?
Yeah, and believe it or not, that's not something that I've directly thought about. I think the way that like direct to consumer continues to break itself apart is honestly with that creativity, that nimbleness, that real sort of one-to-one connection with consumers that, a brand who's not necessarily direct to consumer might not have. And, I'm not going to call out any of the big box brands right now, but I value that like my direct to consumer experiences, my CX team has had very, very direct relationships with consumers asking questions, whether it's on our social pages, whether it's through like one-on-one chats on our websites or something like that. I think it's called direct to consumer for a reason. And I know that's a little bit of a cop out, but there will always be this inherent interest in direct to consumer brands to hear the consumer, to give the consumer what they want, and then at times lead the consumer down a path that could be, at least as it relates to this specific question, this new normal, sort of helping consumers figure out what this new normal is in a way that they haven't even thought of before. Of course, all brands are capable of that. I think my experience from a direct-to-consumer lens has been the relationships that we have with all of the customers, receiving all of the feedback, and actually making actionable changes as a result of that.
That's perfect. So hopping into like this new normal, and obviously out of home during the time of COVID, it makes me want to pull my hair out when I've come across clients that are, saying, why should we be looking at the out of home space right now? We can't buy subway or we can't buy airport, and they're not really aware, of how vast the out of home channel is. So obviously commuter patterns, traffic patterns have changed over the past few months. And fortunately now we're able to track where these people are, like we've mentioned before, where they're going, and have an idea of real-time impressions through this new normal. Paul, starting with you, like, how do you think D2C brands can really take advantage of the out-of-home channel right now, at least up until, there's a vaccine and we sort of get back to where we were prior to March?
Yeah, for better or worse, from the beginning of the lockdown, I thought that OUTFRONT did a great job of sharing traffic patterns by market. We share Smart Scout data on a weekly cadence to help show, the lockdown on 3/14 and then the steady build back. It's strange because a lot of people are sitting at home, so they have their own idea of what markets are doing based on what they see in the news. And, it's difficult to make a point when in your head already you have this preconceived idea that nobody's out doing anything. I think last week for the first time we saw traffic pattern and traffic data back up to 100% of pre-COVID levels. To your point and Neil's point earlier, it's different. The traffic patterns are different, but the audience is there. So I think with an ability to see that, an ability to ingest that data and then react to it, to Neil's point before about reaching new audiences and adapting, you might saturate one audience or one market, and how do I pivot to a different one? We have the data to help make that story for you. So I think asking the question, digging into where the opportunities are, I think the outdoor industry is more than prepared to answer that question. And, I've been really proud to be able to share that Smart Scout data on a weekly basis as a way to kind of help some proactive thinking that might not occur to you while you sit in, your home office or wherever that you are. It's been a lot of fun.
Totally. I mean, I think OUTFRONT's done a phenomenal job. I constantly, read those updates weekly, and it helps, guide conversations with clients. I think Geopath and Intermix have been phenomenal in terms of providing us with accurate information. Vimo, there's so many audience insights partners out there that are really helping us tell a strong story to clients who are, still looking to the out-of-home channel to spend. Neil, I mean, for you, you know, how do you think D2C brands can kind of take advantage of the out-of-home channel right now based on these changes in commuter and traffic patterns?
Yeah, I think the need and sort of dependency on advertising right now is to both be socially responsible, health-wise responsible, but also to kind of like take people out of their current everyday. You know, in my mind, an effective ad campaign is not necessarily like, this sucks, everybody's miserable, COVID's the worst. Like, we know those things. Those are the things that are obvious and are a given. I think like the most effective ad campaigns that I've seen, even in an out-of-home space, are the ones that, you know, even just for a second, take me away from like what we're currently living through. And, you know, let's face it, 2020 has been a rough year on many fronts. I look toward brands, and as I'm in conversations now with my own brand about how we communicate to customers moving forward, it's much more, let's not be so on the nose with what we're dealing with. Obviously, we want to be a resource for people in these times, and we want to be respecting everything that's going on. But let's actually zoom out a little bit and give people a break from what's going on. So to that point, you know, I think that there's obviously so much that can be done in the out-of-home space, no matter what the platform is. I think the challenge and what's exciting for me is, how do brands execute on that in a creative way, when creative in my mind probably means more than it has in my entire career, because it's not just, okay, this is now a reason for me to buy this. It's, okay, this brand understands what I'm going through. They want to give me this 3-second solitude. And, you know, now, whether I'm ready to buy this product right now, or if it's something that I'll use when things do go back to a little bit more of the normal, it's a brand that's now top of mind for me.
Brian, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Neil, I'm curious, you know, as you've pivoted during this during the quarantine, how do you balance the insane amount of data and information that you have short term, like day by day, the stuff that you get, I would imagine, in your inbox to react to, versus some of your longer term you know, marketing plans that were, of course, disrupted? Like, how do you balance the two, and what data do you think has been kind of the most useful in navigating that?
Yeah, so I'm not saying this just for the dramatic effect. Anything that we thought we knew going into COVID has been completely backburnered, to say the least. You know, it's a new world, and we don't know how long the new world is going to stay here for. But whether we wanted to admit it and whether we still want to admit it, the person who bought luggage from us in April is the person that we need to be targeting right now, because it's more likely that more people like the luggage buyer in April will be buying now than the person who was buying in January or in December. That'll change, obviously, as we get into the holiday season, which is typically a very strong time for Away. It's a very giftable product. I encourage everyone to check it out. After that little plug, I would just say that the key metrics that we're sort of thinking about right now are anything across the entire travel sphere that relates to people passing through TSA checkpoints, total flights booked, total people on Pinterest who are looking at future travel. Those are the type of people who right now, even though, you know, it's not a direct one-to-one relationship that we have with them in most instances, it's starting to now serve as a directional read for us to get a sense of what we can anticipate revenue to be like in the upcoming days, weeks, and how we should be spending to support that. Obviously, my job is to drive revenue through paid media. If people aren't passing through TSA, if people aren't searching for flights, if people aren't looking for road trip ideas, you know, that's not a good sign for my business. So do I want to be spending into that? There's definitely this new idea where my job, my team's focus should be actually creating this new demand. We can't rely on this organic demand that typically exists, because people do typically travel, whether regularly or seldomly. There are people who are always coming into the travel funnel. It's definitely changed to the point now where it's like, by no means should we be encouraging travel, because we know that right now it's best for everybody to stay home, social distance, wear masks, all that good stuff. But we want to get people excited for their next trip. We want to get people excited for going home to see family who they haven't seen in a long time, or taking a trip with friends that, you know, isn't the exact trip that they originally were planning, but is a now, again, new normal trip, whether it's a camping trip out of the city or even just like a trip to a beach where you can socially distance. I think there's so many indicators that show the interest remains there, but something like add to cart rate or conversion rate, you know, right now it's not the best leading indicator for us in a time when we know our typical conversion period is X. After that, the typical trip takes place in Y, when we know people probably are not going to be traveling in the most traditional form for a little while yet. So, you know, it's something that is keeping me up at night in the very best way, as in like, what is the next indicator that I can use to get a sense of how travel's rebounding, how all industries are rebounding, even consumer confidence. You know, it's a luxury to be able to travel, and it's a luxury to be able to even be thinking about travel. So consumer confidence is certainly playing a big key here as well. And, you know, to Brian and Quan's credit and a lot of our other great vendors, I'm really relying on them to get creative. You know, at the beginning of this, one of our TV vendors, Bliss Point Media, actually said, you know, you should start looking at industries that are not competitive industries, but are also similarly impacted. So since then, we've been thinking about like, what has foot traffic been like in and around gyms? How have people been buying like home gym equipment and things like that? Like, what's the readoption rate going to be to gyms and fitness centers once this all comes back? And can we use that as a directional read on what people's travel trends will look like in the next couple of months once there is a vaccine? There's a lot of things that we're thinking about differently that is really exciting to me. You know, full disclosure, I wish I didn't have to think about it because it's indicative of this horrible pandemic that's affecting everyone. But as a marketer who's always trying to figure out like what is making people tick, it's a very interesting time to think about, from whether it's an awayscape or a totally different brandscape, just to even be looking at an ad and thinking, this is something that I would do differently, or this is where my brand can do a little bit better.
Perfect. That is a very in-depth answer. So thank you. You know, kind of as we get to the question and answer part of, even though we've already addressed a few of them, you know, one of the questions that I thought was important to kind of answer from all of our ends is, you know, new channels in the out-of-home space, or I should say, not new channels, but other formats in the out-of-home space that kind of play well now that may not have been looked at back in January. Curious, Neil, you know, what do you see now as a channel that could be a real driver for a D2C brand? And by channel, I mean tactic, you know, in the out-of-home world that, you know, could really play well right now?
Yeah. I think something that excites me that, you know, full disclosure, my team has not specifically looked into yet, but it's something we're very interested in, is the idea of using digital out of home. Obviously with digital out of home, we have the opportunity to rotate in different messages at different times. And Paul was kind of talking about this earlier, whether it's a Friday or whether it's raining, or, you know, depending on what's actually happening in that specific geographic area as it relates to COVID or anything else going on in the world. I think that that's something that typically people might not have been too excited about because there is the share of voice concern. But I think now having that digital out of home presence with the ability to really rotate in a new message very, very quickly is something that's super attractive to me, because at any time this thing could flip itself on its head again and change, and we have no idea what's to come. So that oversight is something that is very attractive to me as I think about these launches that we were talking about at the very beginning of this conversation.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I mean, I think digital is definitely going to play a large role in the remainder of the year in regards to how certain brands, you know, utilize the out-of-home channel. A question that we got in, Paul, that I think you could kind of touch on: how do you think D2C brands out-of-home strategies, you know, kind of differ from other categories? I mean, D2C is kind of looked at as its own category now, but you've again worked on so many large brands across so many different categories. How have you kind of seen that? And I guess, Neil, you'd probably want to touch on that also, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I'll segue into what, Neil's response, but I think that, the focus, they understand the competitive landscape. They understand what they're solving for. And I think that, big brands, big agencies, there's certain pieces of the marketing puzzle that are a bit siloed. So I think that, piecing stuff together can at times be a little clunky. And I think that, everyone as an industry is kind of working on how to be more streamlined and more, quicker to market. But, to Neil's point earlier, I think the ability to pivot quickly, to react, to focus on a lifestyle and truly understand the brand and connect and understand how each media channel ultimately funnels up to a very clear business goal. I think D2C brands are basically, they came in as competitive and challenger brands to legacy industries and disrupted the entire process. And I think that's inherent in the way that they approach marketing. It's clear objectives and goals, the ability to understand every media channel for the value it brings to the media mix, a focus on return on investment, because they have to go, to Neil's point, from 0 to 1 million real quick. I think that approach to market is the art side of the art and science. And I think that's where really successful campaigns come in, a great balance of understanding, who you're targeting, a great incorporation of data to help drive, how it's going to work. And then that belief that your brand is truly the right brand at the right time, at the right place. And I think those things together, I think D2C brands do a really good job of understanding those ingredients.
Yeah. And then I agree with all of that. I think if I take off my direct to consumer hat for a second, I think even though I've never been on the brand side, other than my agency work, I imagine that McDonald's, for example, isn't thinking, what's my ROI on this billboard that I'm putting outside of this highway, outside of this major city? I think if there's a flaw in the direct-to-consumer marketing measurement the measurement tools, which I'm the first to say that there is, we expect to know what every ROI is on every dollar that's placed on every single medium, when in actuality, it's much more, to me, the sum of all parts as opposed to the sum of the individual parts. And I think that I oftentimes get tripped up on, okay, in Facebook, I can measure this way. In Google, I can measure this way. I can't measure this way in some other areas, but there are so many other, and we talked about this already, valuable components and measurement pieces that come from these quote unquote immeasurable channels that I think a company like McDonald's or another big brand doesn't get so washed down in the nitty gritty of the individuals, but rather when we, and again, I'm speculating here, when we put this billboard outside of Columbus, Ohio, we saw this much increased foot traffic at our stores, which translated to a total increase in revenue. That couples with what we're doing on radio and what we're doing on Facebook and what we posted organically on Instagram and the press coverage that we got here during this time. It really is the sum of all parts. And I think there's, like I said, a need for direct to consumer brands, because our budgets are a little bit smaller, because we have this desire for everything to have an immediate link to an ROI, for us to think of things as individual channels as opposed to the summation of everything that we're doing.
Well, gentlemen, terrific conversation today. Thank you, Neil and Paul and Brian. Wow, I can't believe it's already almost time to call it a day. So, but it's been really, really interesting. And I say the time went by really fast because it was so fascinating. Well, thank you all for participating today and sharing your wonderful insights with us on this important category and how it fits with out of home. Again, everyone out there listening, the webinar will be available shortly, later today as a recording. So please share it with your friends and colleagues. We do have another webinar tomorrow that will be related to data and attribution research. So that one should be a really interesting webinar as well. Again, thank you all. Thanks for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks for having us, Neil and Paul.
Thank you very much.
For you guys chiming in. So thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Stephen, and OAAA.